This story is based on alleged accounts without concrete evidence and may be viewed as science fiction. It is presented for entertainment and discussion purposes only, and we do not endorse or support any claims made. Viewers should conduct their own research and form their own opinions. In the preceding episode, the author was taken aback by the revelation that the history of extraterrestrial beings extended far beyond tens of thousands of years. In this video, we will continue this conversation. Sure. We can talk about the events of 1940 again. As you mentioned earlier, there was a conflict between humans and the indigenous people living in the cave. Can you provide more details? Sure. In 1940, the Mulek Expeditionary Force established an archaeological camp. At the top level of the facility after discovering it, with the involvement of archaeologists and geologists, the exploration of the site became increasingly intense. When they reached the second level, they began to encounter some indigenous people, whom they referred to as the Greys. The soldiers' equipment and weapons made it impossible for them to remain concealed, and they could sense someone following them in the dark, but there was no interaction. The lower levels of the cave had no light source, but the walls and tunnels were lined with the same luminescent material, emitting a purple glow that they had seen before, so they could still make out the direction they were heading. The soldiers found that the lower the level, the hotter and more humid it became, with water droplets even condensing on the walls. And there was a foul odor, like that of some kind of chemical plant. The investigation lasted for several weeks, during which the Greys remained hidden in the shadows, observing the soldiers but never interacting with them. All the tablets that were excavated were transported to the Mulek base in Alamogordo. At the time, some soldiers' tasks were to record everything they saw in writing. As time went on, the people on site became accustomed to the place, and they proceeded to explore the third level. They began to hear noises from unknown sources that lasted for a few minutes. A hissing sound that felt like some kind of creature intentionally making a sound. At the time, the soldiers did not know that the Greys were attempting to intimidate them, as they believed there were no other creatures in the area. As the exploration continued deeper, the sounds began to become more eerie, resembling the screams of children and women. However, someone soon realized that these sounds were repeating in a certain pattern, like a record player playing on repeat. These sounds sound like human voices, the commander recorded. However, the exploration work was essentially complete at the time, and he decided to let the team retreat first before returning to investigate the sound issue. Unexpectedly, two soldiers believed they had located the source of the sounds during the exploration and decided to investigate on their own. The two soldiers walked deeper into the cave, where it became even hotter and more humid, and they eventually came across a room. They peered inside secretly, and one soldier claimed he saw at least 50 indigenous people in the room. with a lot of experimental equipment on the tables. Some indigenous people and animals were lying on tables, appearing to be part of some kind of experiment. The soldiers were frightened by Gray's large eyes and small stature. One of them noticed a screen on one of the walls in the room, just like the colorful TV screens they had seen on the upper level, displaying the movements of the human beings on the top floor. He realized that these indigenous people had a full grasp of the expedition team's movements, and prepared to secretly return to the upper level to report. However, the Greys soon noticed these two soldiers and rushed out to try to capture them. One soldier was caught, while the other had to run for his life to the upper level. He shouted all the way until he saw the shadows of people on the upper level, realizing that he had a chance to be saved, and frantically fired his gun behind him. Other soldiers heard the gunfire and immediately fired in his direction, fortunately not killing him. The soldier rushed into the crowd and shouted, "There are monsters behind me." The soldiers then noticed a group of Greys wielding weapons chasing after him, and immediately formed a defensive formation to prepare for battle. The battle was intense and lasted for about 3 hours. The indigenous people used a type of beam weapon that burned objects to ashes upon impact, causing significant damage to the expedition team at first. However, the commander quickly discovered that the metallic objects in the cave could block the damage from these beams, and ordered the soldiers to take cover behind them. Although the weapons of the indigenous people were advanced, they lacked the concept of coordinated combat, and were unable to form a well-trained firepower to suppress the enemy, causing them to retreat step by step. After the battlefield was cleared, and the U.S. military lost over 10 soldiers, while the death toll of the indigenous people was more than 30. The U.S. military also confiscated the beam weapons used by the Greys. According to the commander's observation, the indigenous people did not seem to be good at combat. Some of them turned and ran away at the beginning of the battle. The commander did not intend to stay there any longer and chose to return to the Mullik Air Force Base with the confiscated weapons and Gray's bodies. However, the soldiers had already begun to panic because they knew very well that the enemy they had fought against was not ordinary human beings but another type of life form. They were about 4 feet, 1.2 meters, tall, with gray-white skin, big black eyes, with almost no eyelids, and no hair on their bodies. The Army High Command at the Mullik base was shocked by the battle, and immediately requested the expedition team to return to the cave to collect more evidence. They also sent people to seal off the surrounding area. The expedition team did not encounter the Greys again during this exploration, but they did not dare to explore the areas below the 4th level, and instead took everything they could find on the top 3 levels and left. According to the investigation, the number of dead indigenous people was not high. At least much less than the number of Greys remains found, which means that the combat effectiveness of these Greys was indeed poor, and they were unable to defeat even the indigenous people with more primitive weapons. After learning about the indigenous people's situation, the military dispatched a special team to visit the local Indian tribes, and some Indians told the military that there had been legends about monsters under the flat-top mountains since ancient times. as well as stories of warriors fighting against them. During my retirement from the Dulce facility, I visited those tribes and spent a lot of time and effort studying their customs and culture in order to integrate with them. I learned stories about UFOs, greys, and human abductions from the local Indians, which were very interesting, and they were the most reliable eyewitnesses. According to records of the Gray people, they have branches living on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau besides North America, but I have never been there, so I cannot confirm their existence. Interesting. Yes, so from 1940 to 1979, New Mexico was actually the most advanced scientific research center in the entire United States. And the technology products discovered in the Dulce facility brought great improvements and leaps in our country's technology. Colonel, if the Gray people still exist after 40 years of conflict, how could the military use the Dulce facility? About 2 years after the end of the conflict, at the end of 1942, when the United States had already entered the war, the military increased the excavation of the Dulce facility in order to develop new technology as soon as possible. The first problem to be solved was the relationship with the Greys. Linguists were mobilized to decipher the Greys' language. Geologists and engineers began to repair the existing caves, and scientists tried to reverse engineer their weapons. At that time, only the commander of the Mulek expedition team and the first group of scientists who entered the facility remained at their posts. Other ordinary soldiers were either reassigned or honorably discharged. For some soldiers who suffered from mental trauma, they were sent to the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland for compulsory correction. Some soldiers were sent to the Portsmouth Naval Prison on charges of posing a threat to national security. Colonel, why were these witnesses sent back instead of allowing them to continue working at the Dulce facility? When I read this part of the report, I also had this question. I speculate that the military believed that this area would be the future core of scientific research. As a new facility, they needed to carefully screen trustworthy people, rather than using former soldiers. What happened next? The military first established a complete permanent facility on the top floor. As the Greys mainly gathered on the lower floors, the military did not rashly intervene, but first tried to find a way to communicate with them. By the end of 1943, linguists had made a breakthrough in deciphering the tablets. They deciphered some of the contents of the equipment, such as the fiber optic cables found on the top floor, which were actually data transmission fibers. The giant screens and electronic typewriters were some form of computer. And there were also medical pods and scanning equipment, which are now widely used in civilian fields and are familiar to you. Strangely, most of these top-floor facilities were idle for hundreds to thousands of years. The military speculated that this was because the external environment had deteriorated, making it impossible for the Greys to continue living on the top floor, because their skin could not adapt to the sun and dryness. Then came a long period of repair work. A large number of engineers tried to restore the operation of these devices on the top floor. They attached translated labels to each device, so that they could simultaneously contact the alien text. According to records, these alien texts are very similar to the cuneiform writing used by early human civilizations such as Sumerians. So the military specifically invited scholars who studied this writing from France and the UK to decipher the aliens' text system. The deciphering work continued for a long time. Even if they used Mesopotamian tablets as a reference, many texts could not be deciphered. But scientists still tried to communicate with the Greys using their existing language knowledge. At first, they sent some soldiers to sneak into the third floor and left behind stone tablets with alien text. The Greys seemed to know that humans did not intend to use force to attack and gave some friendly responses, such as capturing the soldiers when they entered, but quickly releasing them. This testing continued for a few months, and then a few Greys representatives began to enter human territories above the second floor and proposed to trade with humans. They urgently needed biological resources, or to be blunt, biological organs, for their genetic modification to achieve the goal of continuing their race. In exchange, they could provide technical guidance for humans. This communication was initially very difficult, because humans' deciphering of Gray's text was too limited. But as the communication deepened, the Gray quickly developed very sophisticated translation devices, which were beyond the level of human technology at that time. This made the communication between the two sides more efficient. Yes, for many insiders at the time, the existence of the Greys were hard to accept, because they actually lived on this planet earlier than humans and had more advanced scientific and technological knowledge. For those who came into contact with the Dulce secret, their beliefs about human history, politics, and religion all collapsed. Only people with strong wills could accept these new facts and continue to move forward. Mesopotamian tablets. These are stone tablets that record early Sumerian and Akkadian languages and are a key reference for deciphering cuneiform writing. So the meaning is that we humans are not alone in the universe? That's right. There are other intelligent life forms in the universe besides humans. To be more blunt, more advanced intelligent life lives in caves, underground, and on the surface of the earth where humans cannot reach. Do you really think that ordinary people in 1943 could accept this fact? The more devout religious believers, the less they can accept it. So at that time, there were not a few people who went crazy according to official records, and some even committed suicide. What happened next? After the formal contact with the Greys, the Dulce secret began to be sent back to Washington in a limited way in 1943. However, insiders were still very few because it had to be considered that even the top politicians might not be able to maintain their composure in the face of this fact. However, a tragedy still occurred. James Vincent Forrestal, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, was one of the earliest insiders. But his physical and mental condition quickly deteriorated. People around him said that his personality became increasingly paranoid and extreme. Imagine for a person who has strongly adhered to a certain religious doctrine throughout his life, and is later told that all of these things are false, and that the real gods are just a group of aliens. Do you think he can accept it quickly? The fact is that he couldn't. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will resume our on the Dulce files.